Yeah. Run it up, Blondo. Run it up, Blondo.
February 7th, 2019, the date when the Orlando Magic traded for former #1 overall pick just a few years into his career, named Markelle Fultz. Magic fans all across the world were all ecstatic as the Magic had finally acquired a combo guard who had unlimited potential and whose game fit the prototype of a point guard that we wanted ever since Penny Hardaway left. We were all aware that we'd have to wait at least 8 months to see him put on a Magic jersey on the court for the first time, but that was completely fine for us because we had finally gotten a point guard of the future who we can bank on and who at his full potential could lead us back into relevancy and contention in the Eastern Conference. Unfortunately, nothing ever goes to plan for the Orlando Magic as it seems like we're still waiting to see a prized point guard of the future at his full strength and potential on the court. Although he had a solid debut season for us back in 2020, he wasn't really at his best and he wasn't playing at full confidence. When we acquired him, he was so behind as a basketball player that he was struggling to make consecutive free throws at the free throw line and his shooting form looked straight out of a horror movie. However, last season was different. In the 7 full games that he played in, Markelle averaged 14, 6, and 3 with a 26% usage rate in just under 30 minutes per game. His shooting percentages were the same as his debut season, but the difference was that he's playing with more aggression and was a big reason why we started off last season with a franchise best start of 4-0 and eventually 6-2 before Evan Fournier's back started to flare up and injuries and proceeded to pile on, pretty much ending our season 10 games in. Fultz's game was still a little bit restricted due to Steve Clifford's conservative offense and having to defer to Vooch, Evan Fournier, and Aaron Gordon. On top of all that, he only averaged about 61 touches per game, which was extremely low when compared with other guards who average about the same amount of time of possession per touch and points per touch, both stats in which Markelle ranked pretty high in. Add on his solid assist percentage of 33%, and then you could have eventually seen him being given the keys to our offense last season. Despite his skill set still being limited by our coach, Markelle was playing with so much confidence to the point where you could have seen a breakout season looming for him. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, nothing ever goes to plan for the Orlando Magic as an unfortunate ACL tear in his left knee put a stamp on any attempt of a breakout season, and now Markelle finds himself having to come back from a second major injury, and this time on a depleted roster or semi-depleted roster that's inexperienced and completely different to what he played with back in 2020. With all that being said, what should Magic fans realistically expect from Markelle when he returns this season? Could his presence alone help us pick up some wins towards the end of the season that could harness positive momentum heading into next season? Well, in this video, I'll try to predict how he'll fare by using examples of players of similar physique, athleticism, and playing style as Markelle, who tore their ACLs at a young age as well. By using them as a benchmark, it'll help give you guys an idea of what to expect from Markelle this season and in the seasons to come. I'll also break down how his presence on the court could raise the play of his teammates as well, specifically pertaining to our current rebuilding core of Franz Wagner, Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, Chuma Okeke, Jonathan Isaac, and Wendell Carter Jr. So let's get right into the video. Alright, one of the main concerns about Markelle's torn ACL is if he'll ever be the same explosive athlete that he was before his injury. Well, I dug up a few research papers that could help answer that question. The first, conducted in 2013 by surgeons and researchers from Brown University, took samples of 26 NBA players who tore their ACLs and came to the conclusion that in-game performance usually declines significantly from pre-injury levels during the first season of a player's return. Now, nothing surprising there. A player is naturally supposed to struggle when he first comes back from such a major injury. But the study also concluded that players who tore their ACLs in their left knee, like Markelle, usually return to form faster than players who tore their ACLs in their right knee. They said that this could be due to the right leg being the leg that the majority of NBA players use to push off during more aggressive offensive moves. This could be encouraging news for Markelle and JI as well. Furthermore, the study also concluded that younger players usually return to form at a higher rate than players who tore their ACLs over the age of 25, which is another encouraging sign for Markelle. And players like Zach Lavine and Dejante Murray have recently proven that a player who struggles during his return season could eventually get back on track and even improve in the future. Moving along, a more recent research paper was also encouraging. It was conducted by Stanford Associate Professor of Orthopedic Surgery Dr. Jeffrey Abrams and his colleagues. In this study, they derived samples of 50 NBA players across 37 seasons and developed an algorithm that matched ACL injured players with 2 other NBA players who had never torn their ACLs. And they were surprised to find that injured players usually recovered to perform similarly to healthy players matched for the age, league experience, and style of play. Now, there were some limitations of both of these studies, the first being that the details of the surgical techniques and bone fixation methods were not available for all players. Now, why is this important to know? Well, a bone patellar tendon bone graft may affect a player's jumping ability, while a hamstring tendon graft may affect a player's cutting and quickness. So far, there isn't enough research on the long-term impacts of ACL injuries, but in the short term, it's well established that most players will naturally struggle during the first season back from a torn ACL. However, they likely return to form in the season to follow. And based off various studies, players who tore their ACLs before the age of 25 usually come back and improve if they were skilled enough to begin with before their injury and also managed to avoid further damage on their operated knee. Therefore, we should expect Markelle to fully recover by next season. He might not seem as quick and explosive this season, but that's just going to be part of his recovery process. While being explosive is important for Markelle since he's such a threat out in transition, he doesn't really rely on it in the half court. Instead, he uses screens well to navigate through defenders and also has great body control with the ball. His shifty change of space, herky-jerky hesitation moves, and elite handles all allow him to get to wherever he wants on the court. Now, where his athleticism will be needed the most will be out on the open court and also on defense, but like I said, expect his full athleticism to be back by next season. Thankfully, modern surgical techniques have allowed athletes, for the most part, to return to what they were prior to their injury. Barring a major unexpected setback that rarely ever happens, Markelle will most likely return to his old explosive self, hopefully towards the end of the season. If not, then definitely by the start of next season. Alright, research studies and data about ACL injuries are informative and all. I think what's more convincing is actual proof of players similar to Markelle's physical build and playing style who successfully recovered from their torn ACL injuries. Players who either came back and ascended to all-star status or went on to have long and impactful careers playing for a bunch of contending teams. And with that, the first player I'm going to bring up is Dejante Murray of the San Antonio Spurs, who I feel is the closest comparison to Markelle, and that's not only because they were both former Washington Husky guards. At 6'4" with a 6'10" wingspan, like Markelle, Dejante is an elite perimeter defender, a demon out in the open court, and also a great ball handler and playmaker in the half court. Like Markelle again, he works well in tight spaces and breaks out hesitation moves to get a shot off or to open up passing lanes. Again, like Futlz, he uses screens well to get to a spot in the mid-range and is also a strong finisher at the rim. Murray tore his ACL around the same age as Markelle back in October of 2018, and before his injury, he wasn't really known as a good shooter at all, and still isn't, but he was far worse off before. Now, I feel Dejante is the best case scenario for Markelle to follow because Murray has risen into All-Star candidacy despite only shooting 32% from three-point range. The year off that Dejante Murray took to recover from his ACL injury really helped slow the game down for him and also gave him ample time to work on his jump shot in the mid-range and out in the perimeter. His shooting percentages increased all across the board when he returned in the 2019 to 2020 season. Now, of course, Dejante never had to deal with anything as serious as Markelle's thoracic outlet syndrome injury, and Markelle with his current shooting form will have to do a lot of work to get to Dejante's level, but I believe he can because 1, he has a work ethic, and 2, he can become a version of Dejante Murray who's better at getting to the free throw line and better at shooting in the mid-range. So far, it seems like Markelle can repress his nerve issues in the shoulder by shooting from a closer distance, which is why I hope he concentrates on perfecting that first and then gradually expand his range from there. Fultz's mid-range game was pretty decent for someone who was recently diagnosed with TOS back in the 2019-2020 season, as he shot 38% from 10 to 16 feet and 46% from 16 to 23 feet. And last season his percentages from there plummeted, but let's just hope that was just a blip on the screen and it was too small of a sample size anyways to judge him. Briefly going back to Dejante Murray, during his return season he averaged a modest 11, 5, and 6, but the most important thing was that his quickness gradually came back during the course of that season and his confidence levels went up as well. Now, Dejante Murray didn't make his leap into All-Star status until 3 years after his injury, and that's why we have to stay patient with Markelle and trust in him making the same type of jump as well. Maybe not this year, but in the years to come. I want our front office and coaching staff to have the mindset of, what would the San Antonio Spurs do if they were in their situation? Well, they would probably stay patient with Markelle and let him play through all the struggles because his natural talent and potential deserves patience. You see, the Spurs could have easily traded Murray for a more established player, but they stuck with their young point guard, and now the 25-year-old Murray is returning their favor because he's in the midst of a breakout campaign, averaging a near triple-double with elite defense on a decent team in the Western Conference. Rajon Rondo is another player similar to Markelle from my list. Pre-ACL injury, Rondo was a speedy and lengthy point guard with great court vision who also had trouble shooting from the perimeter. Now, we all know how good he was in his prime, so there's no need to get into all that. What's really important to know is how did he fare when he first came back from his ACL tear? Well, he tore his ACL in late January of 2013 and came back exactly a year later, just like Markelle is striving for this year. Unfortunately, Rondo was never the same all-star caliber player after his return, but that's due to a couple of reasons. The main one is that the game kind of passed him by. A modern point guard needs to be able to shoot the ball and also make shots off the dribble, and be able to share the ball with other playmakers on the floor. Rondo was extremely stubborn when the first couple of seasons after his return. He refused to adapt to the modern ways, and it really derailed his career until he finally learned to adapt later on with the Pelicans and Lakers. The other reason could be blamed on mileage. Rondo had tons of mileage on his knees despite being only 26 when he tore his ACL. He pretty much went far in the playoffs in every season of his career up until his injury and played the majority of the regular season games as well. Therefore, Rondo was on his way to a quick decline and his injury simply accelerated that process. Now, conversely, Markelle is only 23 years old and has barely played above a full season of regular season games in his 5-year career so far, so I expect him to eventually be back to the same level athletically, unlike Rondo. Rondo has remained relatively healthy since his ACL tear and has carved out an impressive second half of his career. He's still in demand today as the Cavs recently gave up some future assets for him to be their backup point guard. Moving along, I'm going to briefly talk about Zach LaVine's ACL success story. Of course, he's not the same type of player as Markelle, but it's important to point out that he's recovered pretty well from his ACL tear and has looked just as athletic as he did before his injury. He tore his ACL in February of 2017 and came back 11 months later on a new team and a new system, kind of similar to what Futlz will have to deal with this year. Now, Lavine struggled a lot in his return season as he shot 38% from the field and a career-low 34% from 3, while being a huge net negative on the floor for his team. And I'm bringing that up because I don't want anyone to overreact if Markelle performs worse than he did before his injury. Even a player with star potential or star talent struggles returning from such a serious injury. Therefore, we can't predict Fultz's future on this season alone if he struggles. Lavine's production gradually increased in every season after his return, and we should expect the same trajectory for Markelle. The next name that I'm going to bring up might surprise you as an ACL injury success story, but Derrick Rose was the same age as Markelle when he tore his ACL back in April of 2012. Rose came back 18 months later, and although his numbers went down all across the board, he still looked as agile and springy like he did during his MVP season. His poor stats could be blamed on him just being rusty, and he only played 10 games in his return season anyways. It was simply too small of a sample size to judge his performance and recovery. And because it took 18 months off for him to recover, his endurance levels were not up to par and his touch around the rim was off as well. Therefore, I'm going to conclude that Rose came back well from his ACL tear. It was his meniscus tears later on in his career that ultimately declined him from a superstar level player to a fringe all-star. If you only analyze his first comeback attempt strictly on retaining his athleticism, then you'd also agree with me and conclude that he successfully came back from his injury. And that's what I'm hoping for Markelle. I just want him to return to the same athlete that he was pre-injury first, and then he can work on improving his game from there. Sometimes the mental hurdles can be harder to overcome than the physical ones when it comes to dealing with major injuries, and I think that's what happened with Derrick Rose. But I don't think that's going to be a problem with Markelle. Markelle has already proven to be resilient and tough-minded, as he has already persevered and returned on the court when a lot of people doubted him when he was diagnosed with TOS. And with Derrick Rose, even with all those setbacks, he's still an impactful player today, nearly a decade later after tearing his ACL. Moving along, Baron Davis is another big and athletic guard who successfully overcame tearing his ACL early on in his basketball career. He tore his ACL in April of 1998 as a freshman at UCLA. Now, Davis came back way too early, only 8 months after tearing his ACL, but surprisingly looked like he never had lost a step. I wasn't able to retrieve his game log from his sophomore year, but it seems like his injury didn't affect him at all, as his stats increased from his freshman year, and he eventually became a top 3 candidate for Naismith Player of the Year in 1999. It's a relief to know that someone like Baron Davis still went on to become one of the most explosive point guards in NBA history despite tearing his ACL at such a young age and coming back way too early from it as well. Now, the common theme that I'm finding is that explosive guards tend to retain their athleticism even after tearing their ACL. It's only if they tear it again or have multiple lower body injuries following that when it starts to decline them physically, like we saw with Derrick Rose. Rose's highlights from his prime are so fun yet so tragic to watch because he often landed on one knee after explosive dunks. Markelle did the same thing with us, and it was frightening to watch him descend down from an explosive play and land on one knee and then kind of wince while trying to get up. I hope our medical staff has briefed him on proper landing techniques and also limiting sudden changes in movement that aren't necessary, for example unnecessarily Eurostepping when he could easily blow by a defender head on. Moving along, Kyle Lowry, like Baron Davis, tore his ACL as a freshman in college. Of course, he was never at any point in his life an explosive athlete like Markelle, but it's important to bring him up because he's had a long and relatively healthy career in terms of his knee health despite tearing his ACL at a young age. I also want to point out that his career didn't really take off until his 4th or 5th season, so he's another good example for Markelle to look up to and follow. Ricky Rubio is another solid comparison for Markelle. Now, I know he just recently tore his ACL for the second time, but I'm going to talk about when he first tore his ACL, which was 10 years ago in March of 2012. A young Rubio had a similar build to Markelle. Of course, he was nowhere near the same athlete, but he was a pass-first point guard who liked to maneuver around the mid-range area with the ball on a string like Markelle. He always looked to make the right play, but also flashy when it needed to be. In his return season, Rubio got off to a slow start, but I could attribute that to him just being rushed back since he came back in the same calendar year in which he tore his ACL in. Rubio gradually increased his production towards the course of that season and eventually started to show the same flashes of superstardom that he displayed before his injury. He was blowing by defenders and getting to his spots on the court and also making plays without any hassle. But unfortunately for him, and just like Derrick Rose, Rubio suffered through numerous lower body injuries that prevented him from reaching his true potential. Now, if Markelle never reverts back to the shooter that he once was back in college, then he could look towards Shaun Livingston for some inspiration. During an unfortunate fall back in 2007, Shaun Livingston shattered his knee and tore damn near every ligament in it, but still overcame that injury by using his basketball IQ, physical attributes like his length, toughness, and also mastering one aspect of the game, the mid-range. He struggled for half a decade until he finally landed on the perfect spot and became an integral part of a dynasty with the Warriors. And if Kel is unable to ascend into stardom, then becoming another Shaun Livingston type player will be a good floor for him to settle on. Kel's natural talent and IQ will still let him become a solid starting point guard or a backup point guard on a winning team, just like Livingston, who himself was once an uber-hyped point guard prospect, oozing with natural talent before his injury. To finish off this part of the video, other than those that came back from their torn ACLs in college, every player that I just named struggled in their return season back from their torn ACLs. And that's why we need to temper our expectations for Markelle this season. So we only have 3 more months to play this season. When he returns, Futlz will likely not play in back-to-backs, will definitely be on a minutes restriction, and will likely come off the bench for the first couple of weeks just to get into rhythm, and he slowly progress from there. Now, having said all that, even though Markelle Fultz will probably not be at his best for the majority of this season, he'll still have a huge positive impact on the court. Why am I saying that? Well, we'll finally have a true primary ball handler and facilitator on the floor. Inserting a floor general like Markelle will make everything so much easier for all our players. He's going to be a gift for all our big men as he's proven to be an elite interior passer, and also for our guards because he's going to relieve some ball handling pressure for those who just aren't ready yet. Franz Wagner has done a marvelous job creating for others as a primary ball handler so far. He's just doing everything on natural instincts and talent right now. Once team starts to game plan against him and really scout him properly, then he'll need to tighten up his handles and become more aggressive and confident in his playmaking abilities. Only after taking care of those areas of his game can he become our primary playmaking option. But for right now, he shouldn't be given the reins just yet. Similarly, Jalen Suggs has proven that he can make good reads so far, but his ball handling skills is way below par for a true point guard right now, which is why we need Markelle to come back ASAP to show Jalen the way and also release some pressure off of him. One of the biggest problems on offense with the Magic this season is a lack of ball movement, and hopefully that could change with the addition of Markelle, who looked to move the ball first rather than for his own shot. Along with his potential as a 3-level scorer, Fultz's court vision was a big reason why he was such a highly touted prospect coming out of college. And with that ability, he'll be able to find open teammates and cutters that some of our primary ball handlers this season have routinely missed. Also, there have been numerous instances where our guards have slowed down fast breaks and looked for their own shot when they could have easily passed it back and forth with Franz or Chuma, for example, and ran give and goes until, an easy layup could have been generated. And speaking of fast breaks, one of Markelle's main strengths is his transition scoring and playmaking, so he would immediately increase our fast break points per game, which only sits in the bottom 5 in the league so far. Frankly, everyone's going to benefit from having a point guard like Markelle on the floor with them, but I'm going to highlight a few players in particular who could thrive when Markelle is in the game. The player who will benefit the most will be Franz Wagner, who's been looking like a legit Rookie of the Year candidate as he's put up an efficient 16 points per game as a 20-year-old rookie despite being left out dry when open on corner threes and on cuts towards the basket. Insert Futlz into the equation and you'll see his stats go up even more. You can bet your bottom dollar that Futlz will quickly develop good chemistry with Franz as their strengths could perfectly mix in well. Markelle will actively look to find Franz open in the corner or cutting towards the basket like he used to do with J.I. and Aaron Gordon. And what I'm really looking forward to watching the most are pick and roll actions between the two of them. Franz and Wendell have formed a nice little effective partnership together, and I expect Markelle and Franz to form the same. That's what high IQ basketball players do. And I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but we're finally picking up a roster full of them, and it's just going to be glorious to watch them develop in the future. Everything I've said about Franz can be applied with Chuma Okeke as well. Chuma has never had the opportunity of playing with a real point guard in his young career so far. Therefore, like Franz, expect him to get fed on cuts towards the basket and on open threes as well. Chuma has established himself as a key piece of our rebuilding puzzle, therefore I have to make a video on him soon, so look out for that. Wendell Carter Jr. is another player who'll thrive with Markelle on the floor with him. First of all, he's finally going to get to play with a legit pass-first point guard, and that's a fact because if you look back, he had no real point guard in Chicago. Look at the names that he had to play with. Thomas Satoransky, a young Kobe White, Chris Dunn. Come on, we haven't even seen the best of Wendell, and a type of player that'll get the best out of him is a floor general like Markelle Fultz. Markelle will get him the ball in advantageous scoring positions in the post, and Wendell will finally have a guard who he can play off of through pick and rolls. Throwing it back a bit, Markelle and Vucevic formed a nice little pick and roll partnership together. Vuce benefited from Markelle's advanced feel of operating in tight spaces with having the ball on a string at all times and making quick passes, while Fultz benefited from Vuce's clever rolls towards the basket. That same chemistry could be formed between Wendell and Markelle because Wendell is currently within the top 15 in pick and roll man points per game, but with just a 27% rolling frequency rate, which lands him just 36th in the league. Wendell likes to ghost screens and flip it and roll towards the basket. He's been often left hanging so many times this season after gaining good position down in the paint. Hopefully with Markelle at the point now, those opportunities won't be left untaken. Furthermore, Wendell has been one of our best catch and shoot scorers this season, so expect him to score even more after being fed on open mid-range shots or open threes when he stretches outside the 3-point line. Moving along, Cole Anthony is having somewhat of a breakout season so far. Before his ankle injury that has really limited him recently, he was averaging an efficient 20 points per game while being a huge net positive on the court. And he did that despite not having many open looks or having another competent facilitator on the floor with him, not including our young rookies. Now Markelle will help take some pressure off of Cole and just let him concentrate on what he does best, which is shot making and isolation scoring. And eventually within the process, slowly help Cole work on becoming a better facilitator instead of him just being thrown into the fire and having to learn on the fly like he's been trying to do so far. Now, their future as a backcourt pairing depends all on Cole's continued improvement as an off-ball scorer. Before his ankle injury, Cole was shooting 37% on catch-and-shoot three-pointers on good volume, which was a significant improvement from his rookie season. If that becomes the norm, then there will be no problems with Fultz and Cole starting together or being in the same lineup together in games. Our other young promising guard, Jalen Suggs, will be relieved to have Fultz on the court as well. He's going to get easier chances to score and will also learn firsthand on how to become a primary ball handler from watching Fultz and learning from him in real time on the court. I've already broken down Suggs' fit with Markelle in detail in my video from August titled Removing All Doubts About Jalen Suggs' Fit with the Magic Backcourt. And the things that I've said in that video still holds true to this day, as Suggs is more comfortable playing off ball right now and needs someone like Markelle to teach him how to become a true point guard. But Suggs has looked more comfortable since his return from his hand injury, and I feel like adding Fultz on the court with him will open up better looks for him to score, which will only help his confidence levels going forward. and having to work for shots less on offense will only leave him with more energy of being more of a pest on defense and a lockdown defender that he's already shown of being. We won't be making any crazy push towards a playing spot with Markelle now on board. Not even prime Chris Paul could do that for us. However, expect to see improvements in the overall play of the Orlando Magic, leading to more wins here and there, which would then lead to the Magic developing some positive momentum heading into next season. And that's all that we can ask for the rest of the season. To round off, what we should expect from Markelle this season is a 23 or 24-year-old player who has missed yet another year of development that will likely struggle in his first couple of weeks, but will gradually show some progression from there, just like all those players that came back from their torn ACLs that I listed earlier on in this video. At best, he'll be the same player that he was in the 2020 season, which is solid and good enough for being our main facilitator on offense this season. Next season though is when we should expect him to take the leap to maybe fringe all-star status a la Dejante Murray and hopefully build from there. Now the wild card in his development is his jump shot. He still has a slight hitch, but it's less noticeable than before. Maybe I'm being too hopeful, but his release does look much quicker. Furthermore, if he increases his free throw rate and gets to the line more, then it can offset his lack of shooting, like for example DeMar DeRozan, Jimmy Butler, and of course Dejante Murray. Markelle Fultz has been a fan favorite despite only playing 80 games in 2.5 seasons so far. Even with the iffy jump shot, Fultz's game is so fluid and also erratic in a good way because he has an element of unpredictability that makes him so fun to watch and also tough to guard as an opponent. Let's hope that he regains his explosiveness that made him a terror on the fast break and a solid playmaker in the half court, which would add an impressive building block to an already, impressive rebuilding core so far for the Magic. I'm still a big Markelle Fultz believer, and I really hope that he comes back healthy, creates chemistry with his new teammates, and then takes the next step towards the end of the season and hopefully next season. I honestly believe that he's going to be an integral part of our future and still has the potential of being a top 3 player on a contending team, which is why y'all should be just as hyped as I am for his return. That's the end of the video. It's probably the longest one I've done, and for good reason, because Markelle is still my favorite Magic player, but honestly, Franz is coming full speed at taking that mantle. I hope you all enjoyed it and also learned something new, maybe about torn ACLs and what to expect when an NBA player returns from it. If you guys did, then all I ask in return is a quick click on the like button and also on the subscribe button as well if you haven't already subscribed yet. Small actions like those goes a long way in growing this channel and also growing the awareness of Orlando Magic fans online. Thanks for all the support, and be on the lookout for more videos as I'll be dropping them more frequently now. So stay safe, take all health precautions in these turbulent times, and yeah, go Magic.